You are now listening to the Counterflow Podcast, a place for dissonant voices and unapproved opinions.
You get split in half, but I call the hologram graph. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Here is your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back once again. This is the Counterflow Podcast. As always, I'm your humble host and narrator, Buck Johnson. Great to have you with us here this week, where my guest, Joe Allen, runs quite the substack. I really enjoy this substack, the Singularity Weekly. And so if that gives you any clue as to what we're going to be talking about, well, good, it should, because what is the singularity? We get into that. Have you heard that term being thrown around? We get into transhumanism, which is part of the singularity, and of course, AI, which is apparently all the rage right now, ChatGPT, dating chat bots, and all of these things. We get into this. Is technology itself, the technology behind AI and transhumanism and the stuff Elon Musk is looking into, is that evil? Is it demonic? Is it based in negativity or darkness or evil? Or is it neutral? And does it depend on what we do with it? Is it like, let's say, a hammer where you could really hurt someone with it, or you could do good things with it? Is transhumanism based on the lie, the ancient lie, back in the Garden of Eden, in the book of Genesis? Is it based on the lie? We actually touched upon the lie in my last episode with Dr. Clark Carlton. So we're getting into all of this today, and I think you guys are going to love it. And what I loved this past week was our Zoom meetup with my Patreon donors, the quote-unquote exclusive club that you too can be a part of if you go to patreon.com/counterflow. $5 or more per month gets you in the club. And every month we do this Zoom call. We had a really great time. What a group of really special, smart, loving, great people. And after our guest left, once again, we hung around for, maybe an hour and kind of caught up. It's becoming like a monthly meetup with family of sorts, even though it's online. And ironically enough, in this episode, we're discussing some of the pitfalls of online technology and whatnot. But this was an excellent time, and we do that every month. I've got a special guest for this coming month in mind, and I don't want to ruin it yet because sometimes his schedule can be a bit tight. I think he's listening to this episode, and I haven't reached out to him yet. But if you're thinking, I think he's talking about me, I might be. We'll be talking soon, I hope. So I want to tell you about Joe Allen. He describes himself over at his Singularity Weekly substack that I mentioned as a quote-unquote fellow primate who wonders why we ever came down from the trees. He writes frequently for The Federalist and Chronicles magazine, which is where I found some of his articles, and of course, the tech editor for The War Room with Steve Bannon. In fact, right before we started recording this, he said, hold on really quick, Bannon's texting me. And I said, well, if I have to be put on hold, the fact that you were having a text conversation with Steve Bannon, that'll work. I'll accept that. I thought that was pretty neat. And let's just get to it right now. Joe Allen, welcome to the show, sir. How are you?
Very good. How are you, Buck?
I'm great. I'm so excited. I've been pouring through your Substack, and I guess I first heard about you through Chronicles magazine, which I love, and then I started doing the research, and you had been on shows that it's just, there's a lot of information out there, and I'm so glad basically to the Singularity Weekly. What a Substack you have. So, of course, I failed to mention the most notable thing is you're on Steve Bannon's War Room, which I'm also a fan of. Let's just jump into an intro for yourself. You can tell my folks whatever you think they need to know about you regarding what we're going to talk about, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, I am the tech editor or transhumanism editor for The War Room. I've been at that position since March of 2021, so a bit over 2 years. And basically, Steve, when we were first made acquainted, I was down to nothing but a flip phone in the wilds of Montana. I have since become a cyborg in order to gripe about the technological infrastructure. So I guess that's the way things are. And I am a writer. I've been a writer for many, many years, but I've turned all of my attention to technology and mostly its downsides. And I put my stuff in a lot of different places. I am going to be putting a lot of stuff up at Substack in the very near future, because I've just finished a very large writing project that's taken up all my attention. And now I'll be going more towards short pieces that will hopefully shake people out of the hypnosis that technology has cast over everyone's eyes. And of course, attract them to stare at their phones and read my work.
Right. Yeah, I guess there's always some irony in some of these things that we're going to discuss here. I want to go over a few terms for some groundwork here, because there's some terms that get thrown out there a lot, and I want to be clear for my audience and myself, I suppose, on what exactly these are. First is the singularity. Can you talk about what exactly that is?
Well, the singularity is a concept that was really made popular by Ray Kurzweil, who you could say is kind of the granddaddy of the transhumanism movement. There were many before him, but he's really the person who put transhumanism on the map. Even if he eschews the term transhumanism, he doesn't really embrace it. The singularity is that moment in time that he predicts that technology will have exceeded human ability to the point that it will no longer be within our ability to predict, and no longer really to be within our ability to control. The three elements that he focuses on, the acronym is GNR. Guns N' Roses fans will find that easy to remember.
That's the first thing I
genetics,
thought of.
Yeah, genetics, nanotechnology, and robotics. And artificial intelligence would fall under the latter. Artificial intelligence is really just a robotic brain, so to speak. And his idea comes from mapping the exponential increase in technological sophistication and complexity over time, and seeing the exponential curve that Moore's law describes this for transistors, but seeing that exponential curve and just projecting it into the future. And a singularity, of course, it comes from the idea of a mathematical singularity. If you're graphing something and it's logarithmic, you're going to get this exponential increase. And once you hit that point, that the line on the y-axis just is basically vertical, then you've reached something like infinite increase. And he predicts it will be sometime around 2045. He's very, very specific on these dates. Sometimes that's to his advantage because it has been confirmed many times. Oftentimes it's to his disadvantage because his predictions have not always panned out. But 2045 is when he sees this happening. And at that point, his general idea would be that the distinction between human and machine will have dissolved. The distinction between actual and virtual reality will have dissolved. And again, the technology itself, mainly because of artificial intelligence, will be completely outside of normal human abilities to predict and normal human abilities to control. Although Kurzweil is not really a post-humanist, post-humanists being those who believe that the future and maybe even the near future will see machines totally outstrip human abilities and replace us entirely. He sees it more as the imprint of what it is to be human will be so deep in that technology, and the continued existence of biological humans will be such a profound effect on the technology that there will still be something human about it. From my perspective, it's nothing recognizably human. And that's a lot of people feel that way. Fortunately, hopefully that continues. And even though this is just a dream, it is a dream world based on science and based on probability. It has come to realization enough that it makes me very uncomfortable, because what I see two things happening. One, I see the technology improving, maybe not to the satisfaction of those who are super optimistic about where it's going to go and the powers that it's supposed to have. But the real technology is improving the genes, or just to manipulate one's biology by way of mRNA injections or any other sort of hormonal or chemical injections. And then on the artificial intelligence front, the AI is definitely improving. It's not superhuman. A lot of it is hype, but it's not enough. It's not overhyped enough for my comfort levels. And the second thing that I see happen is a belief system is really starting to become concrete around this idea that technology will save the human race from all the problems that dog us. And that's really the essence of transhumanism. The transhumanism, I think, can be simply defined as the desire to direct human evolution, the desire to increase technological evolution, and part of that directed human evolution is to merge human beings with machines as much as possible, both our brains and our bodies. And the goal really is to overcome all the problems that religions around the world have always highlighted, the problems of disease, old age, and death, the problems of social strife, and the problems of discontent. And it's a spiritual orientation towards technology as the highest power and towards the endeavors of human beings, especially very eccentric human beings, those who are responsible for inventing and deploying these technologies. And so what we have really in Silicon Valley, in Shenzhen, in Tel Aviv, in London, in Boston, in Seattle, what we have is a heterodox religious orientation that is becoming more prevalent and also becoming, I think, stronger, not only in its the belief system's grip on the people who belong to it, but also the influence of those people over our lives.
Mm-hmm. The last episode I did, we discussed some aspects of Orthodox Christianity, and my guest brought up something, and it seems as I'm researching for the episode with you, it popped back into my head, and it was Romans 1:25, which says who exchanged the truth of God for the lie. A lot of Bibles say a lie, but it's supposed to be the lie, and worshiped and served the creature rather than the creator, who is blessed forever. And in other words, the lie in the Garden of Eden is that we can deify ourselves. And as I'm researching transhumanism and AI and this interview for you, it does seem a little bit like you could say transhumanism's based on the lie in the Bible.
Absolutely. It is a very sophisticated form of idolatry. It's in many ways a return to the archaic god-king cultures of Babylon or Egypt, or maybe even the Shang dynasty of China. And that really is based on the idea that the ruler is equated with the divine, that the ruler is God in some sense, or a god. And to the extent that, again, you can just bracket the actual efficacy of any of these technologies. They are potent, but just bracket that. The belief system itself is powerful enough. You don't have to have an all-powerful ruler for people to believe that your ruler is, in some sense, all-powerful. But this isn't really focused. The interesting thing about transhumanism, and in many ways the terrifying thing, it's not really focused around any single individual. The closest you really get to that is the conservative Inc. worship of Elon Musk as some sort of Caesar figure.
Yes.
Outside of that, though, with Google or Facebook or the sort of techno cult that is forming within the World Economic Forum or any of the other more obscure or academic circles, it's more Borg-like, as it's been observed. James Poulos has really done a lot to make that clear, that it's more this idea of a collective swarm. and that swarm is itself powerful, and it's a digitized swarm. It's a swarm that gains its power and its existence really from digitization. So, but it's still in some way, even if these people don't conceive of it as divine, definitely the same place, that sort of God-sized hole in the heart.
Yes,
that old saying.
Yep.
That hole is being filled with either the technology itself or with digitized personas. Take the BLM movement or the trans movement or any it doesn't have to even be left wing, any digitized sort of movement. And there's this virtualization wherein the higher power in one's life exists by way of the technology and it has overtaken any of the deeper impulses towards the transcendent that traditional religion provides.
Yeah, well put. And I want to get into at some point these chat bots and this quote unquote dating them, because what you just said, I think, is going to lead to a lot of men doing that. But before we get to that part, AI, I'm struggling. I'm starting to finally kind of grasp some of this. I've done a few episodes on it, and it's just, there's so much. Is there something called generative AI that you see as different from, let's say, AI? Is there ways to differentiate types of AI whereas one might be more dangerous or threatening to certain things and one's just more nebulous?
The definition of artificial intelligence is very, very tricky. The term artificial intelligence was coined 1956, and at the time, the idea was already in the air. It's a very old idea in many ways, but at the time, the definition of artificial intelligence was a machine that could think like a human. They had nothing even remotely close to that at the time, and we really don't have anything remotely close to that now. But that was the original definition, and that's why a lot of people say, oh, AI doesn't exist. But after the so-called AI winter, there was a big burst in the 80s where there were a lot of advances, but it was very limited. And then at the end of the major AI winter, you could say would maybe be 2010 and later, 2012, for the last 10 years for sure. What you had, so I'll just lay out 4 different definitions. 4 is maybe too many, but 4. One, an algorithm. And an algorithm is just step-by-step instructions given to a computer. If-then is a very popular concept in this, or a very, a core concept in this. Computer, basically, if a certain premise is present, then this action is taken. So an algorithm is just step-by-step instructions, and there are algorithms aplenty. Our lives are, by and large, ruled by algorithms. We live, some might say, in a quasi-algocracy. A step up from that is machine learning. And machine learning is just what you have is an algorithm that's able to rake over data and come to its own conclusions. So you're not setting up a program, telling it to look over the data and kind of steering it in the direction. You're still steering it. The human bias is still there, but the machine has more freedom to come to its own conclusions, to find its own patterns. So that if you're looking over pictures of cats to find which one's the cutest and which one's the mangiest, you give the parameters to the computer, but the computer is able to come to oftentimes very novel conclusions because it is learning. It's not being programmed, it's training on the data. So you have algorithms, and you have machine learning, and then you have deep learning, which is just extending this farther. Deep learning typically is done through neural networks, and neural networks are just virtual brains. A lot of people would think that maybe it's a physical structure. It isn't. It's a software concept. But you have in silico nodes, which are the rough equivalent of neurons, and parameters, which are the rough equivalents of axons and dendrites, the connective branches between the neurons. And so this neural network is just a more complex algorithm. It's a more complex version of other machine learning techniques. And it's called deep learning because it's able to, these systems tend to be very large systems and can go over tons and tons of data. Chat GPT or just GPT technology is a great example of this. And it also comes to much more subtle conclusions about the data. It's much more non-deterministic, meaning that you can't necessarily predict the output from the input, not because you couldn't in theory, just because the system itself is so large, so complex, that the human mind is not able to do so. Hence the entire AI worship cult. What Norbert Wiener would call gadget worshipers. Mm. But and then you have the concept of artificial general intelligence. So everything I just described, algorithms, machine learning, deep learning, all of this is artificial narrow intelligence, and all of this exists right now. It's called artificial narrow intelligence because it's narrowed down to specific tasks. Some of the most impressive are things like AlphaZero. That's really the one that turned my head around. AlphaZero, just beginning with nothing more than the rules of the game, no previous strategies whatsoever, teaches itself how to play chess or Go, and very quickly comes to a superhuman level of playing so that it becomes a brick wall no human being can get past. And but it can only do that. You can't take AlphaZero and turn it into a system that analyzes radiology scans and things like that. Artificial general intelligence is the dream. It doesn't exist, but it's the dream of being able to link these narrow intelligences together so that you have a single system that can work across domains, and all of those different domains would be kind of rough equivalents to the cognitive modules in the human brain, and it would be flexible, and it would be, they always say it would be human-like, right? You're back to the original definition of artificial intelligence, a machine that thinks like a human. But I can't conceive of a possible world in which it's anything like a human. Even if they were to be able to create such a thing, it would be monstrous. It would be something completely inhuman, completely alien, much like the artificial narrow intelligence is right now. But that's the dream, artificial general intelligence. And it's believed, and just given the fact that all these narrow systems, by the way, when you've perfected a narrow system, or made it very excellent anyway, whether it is to scan for tumors, or look for terrorists, or control a drone swarm, or play Go, or whatever it may be, it is superhuman. No human being can outperform it in that specific task. Artificial general intelligence, then, if you just kept linking them together and more, would de facto be superhuman, at least in the weird alien form that it existed in. And that's why you have right now the big freak out about AI killing everybody, because companies like Google are racing ahead with artificial general intelligence projects with their acquisition DeepMind. You have Microsoft funding and partnering with OpenAI, and OpenAI's stated goal is to create artificial general intelligence. You have ComAI at Meta or Facebook. They are also working on artificial general intelligence. And then you have Tencent and Baidu in China. They're working on artificial general intelligence. All of these different companies are racing ahead with this. So you have two problems there. One, they succeed and they create something that, even if it isn't human, even if it isn't conscious, it simply grants enormous power to the person who has developed it and who controls it. Let's say it doesn't work like they think, though. Let's say that it's just overhype and that it's just a wonky, glitchy monster. If you have a sufficient number of people who don't believe that, who actually believe that they've created a sort of god in silico, well, then now you've got a previously existing techno-religion who has seen their prophecy come true, and it's not some fringe cult like the Heaven's Gate people cutting their junk off and drinking cyanide. It's the CEOs of the most powerful corporations in the world and all of the people under them. It's various political leaders, and its ideological leaders, like the people who gather at the World Economic Forum, they would be that much more emboldened, and to the extent that they could convince the population that such a thing had happened, that they had created artificial general intelligence, and that we are, in fact, hurtling towards the singularity, and there ain't nothing you can do about it. The social and psychological effects of that would be so profound that we've already seen what happens when you digitize the public psyche and manipulate it. That's happening right now, and it's horrific. That would be even more horrific. So that's why I'm concerned about it. A, the possibility that they create a viable technology that's dangerous, or B, that they just simply create a social movement that's sufficiently disruptive and damaging and demoralizing to the population that alone is enough to be a major problem.
Yeah, I mean, there's over the last few years, it feels like much of the society is just hanging on by a thread to begin with at this point. It didn't take much to get us here, right? Since 2020. Yeah, anything of that magnitude, I can only imagine, is there's some hyperbole and some of the conversations around these topics, and I want to try to shy away from, and I want to see if we can get some solid information on. I've heard, look, technology is a tool, just like a gun. It can be used for good, it can be used for bad. AI is a form of technology. Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. AI cannot be bad in itself. What are your thoughts on that line of argumentation?
There's definitely merit to it. I personally think that technology is not neutral, that every technology is limited in its possibilities, and that every technology has certain tendencies or values embedded in it. Really quickly, the person who gave me my start in really understanding artificial intelligence systems, he is an Oxford-trained artificial intelligence programmer, expert, business owner, very successful. And he is without a doubt, he is a good man. And the people around him are good people. I have a number of other friends who are programmers in different areas, cybersecurity, things like that. And they are also very good people. And what they are doing is trying to help humanity by sorting their data, or by protecting their data, or improving their understanding of the world through these digital systems. That's their goal. And to some extent that is happening. And I don't deny that. At the same time, all technologies have certain tendencies embedded in them. Yes, you could take a gun and use it as a surgical tool, but it would be a very messy affair and probably not meet with much success, right? There's a limited range of things you can do with a gun. The same could be said of a shovel. The same could be said of an automobile. And definitely the same can be said of genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, robotics, brain-computer interfaces. All of them have certain tendencies that you're never really going to get out of. And so just going back to the idea of artificial general intelligence, I'll only hit that for just a second, but if you create a superhuman being, you've done something that has certain tendencies you can't get around. You've created a God on earth. That's not really you can't get around that. If you can't control it and you can't predict it, then whatever your intentions are to use it for good and evil really don't matter. Now dial it down to just the artificial intelligence that exists now. The creation of AlphaZero, even though it hasn't killed the popularity and the passion that players feel for chess and Go, that's actually stayed steady, which is very heartening. The end result is that the best Go player and chess player on Earth is a computer now. And that changes the game. And if certain successful artificial intelligence programs begin to be used in warfare, they already are, by the way. Palantir's probably the most successful at this, but all countries use advanced algorithms to enact their goals in warfare. But if it moves from the level of a Go or a chess superpower to an actual geopolitical superpower, if artificial intelligence determines who dominates the planet, and I think there's a good argument that it will, even if you never approach artificial general intelligence, then that has a lot of things embedded in it. For one thing, it has the will of the leaders of that nation or coalition of nations. That their will be the dominant force, geopolitical force on the planet. That if that's good, okay, then good. If that's evil, well, then that's evil. And it's always going to be something in between, and we're always going to wrangle over what good or evil even mean. But so to wrap this all up, I believe that these technologies, and especially their fetishization, have had an enormous psychological, social, and spiritual impact already, and there's really no way to get around it. You can make it better. People like James Poulos, for instance, argue that these technologies need to be reined in. The phrase he uses oftentimes, to catechize the bots, to make the bots, to bring them in accord with divine will. I really appreciate the sentiment, and I think that it's a much more constructive way of approaching it than my own pessimism. At the same time, I remain a pessimist, and I think that these technologies will do what they do already, especially one last thing. The biggest threat I see happening right now is the demoralization. And the biggest problem that presents to us is that human beings are atrophying. Not the most excellent human beings, but as a whole, our skills, our techniques, our long-standing cultural traditions, our social graces, all of these different elements, our ability to forge relationships and alliances with one another, all of these things have been horrifically corrupted and degraded by the mass digitization of society, and that seems to only be increasing and becoming more and more frantic. And so maybe there are ways to turn that around. Maybe, you can always point to the exceptions to the rule. But I think that for me, the best course against this is to reject, or at least make peripheral, most of these technologies and do our best to preserve what we have already and ensure that whatever technologies become added to those traditions, that they remain peripheral and not central, and that they don't degrade what we've inherited.
What's up, guys? Your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson here, and you might notice this recording sounds different than the usual podcast, and that is because I'm sitting outside here in Lockhart, Texas, recording this ad into my iPhone. It probably sounds pretty crappy. Well, I'm doing this to show you something very cool. Many of you guys know that my production team works over at Podsworth Media, and they've been producing my show for quite a while. I get a lot of questions and people asking, who does your podcast? Why does it sound great? And I'm telling you why. It's because the guys at Podsworth are amazing. They've got this brand new online app for taking rough recordings like this and making them a whole lot cleaner and more listenable with just a few easy clicks. It will remove background noise. It reduces plosives. It fixes clipping, which is distortion from recording with the gain up too high. Clipping, which is distortion from recording with the gain up too high, which I can promise you I've done many times, and they fixed this for me. It removes clicks and pops. It removes clicks and pops, and then also levels out the dialogue, so there's no crazy where the guest sounds too loud or the interviewer sounds too quiet. Here's what you guys can do. All of y'all that are interested in recording podcasts or audiobooks or anything, if you're a pastor and you want your sermon recorded, whatever the case may be, go to podsworth.com and click Get Started. You drag and drop your audio files or click to open your file manager. This also works on your smartphone's web browser. You customize your settings that you want, but the default works fine on most podcast recordings. Then enter code BUCK50, BUCK50 for 50% off of your first order. You don't need an account, just an email address and payment. And you'll get a download link in your email for your cleaned up files. How cool is this? The guys at Podsworth run everything they do through this app before they do anything else to it. So all of my recordings go through this app that we're talking about. It works great. Like I said, any spoken word recordings, obviously for podcasts, YouTube videos, sermons, audiobooks, whatever, it will make awful recordings sound listenable and much more professional. So, like I said, go to podsworth.com and click Get Started. You can use promo code BUCK50, BUCK50, for 50% off of your first order. You can use promo code BUCK50, BUCK50, for 50% off of your first order. Let's get it.
Yeah, I mean, walking out, people in your age range or my age range, just walking around outside and kind of people watching, you can see that as these black mirrors that we carry around with us, as they become more human in a sense, we become less human, right? It's like you said, it's atrophied. There's young people that can't socially interact in real life with people. And I find that bizarre and alarming. And it's almost like people find comfort in that now. I thought over 2020 and 2021, I witnessed people that were wanting to be locked down and wanting to stay in their own home and just play on a digital black mirror. And again, that's in my opinion, us becoming less human. You get into a piece in your Substack on chatbots, and this was one of the most fascinating parts of it. I'm quoting you here because I liked this so much. You mentioned 3 possibilities, and I want to go over them. Artificial intelligence is acquiring consciousness via digital complexity. That's 1. 2, inanimate bots exploit our cognitive bias towards anthropomorphism. Or 3, computers function as a digital Ouija board to channel demons. Which of those 3 do you lean more towards?
I'm asked that question a lot. Actually, my own take on it is much more, as the kids say these days, it's much more schizo than even that. And so I tend not to talk about it very much. But I think that just insofar as thinking these things through, isolating those first 2, those are at least reasonably sane. The second is, I think, the most defensible, the most rational, the idea that these things are just simply activating the cognitive circuits for anthropomorphic projection. The first, the idea that they're actually becoming sentient, there are actually rational arguments behind that. Many people aren't satisfied by them. Panpsychism is a very common way of imagining a computer becoming conscious, and it's just the idea that with greater and greater structural complexity and informational complexity, you get consciousness that is just embedded in matter. And I don't believe that, but it is at least within the bounds of a rational framework we can all share. At least it makes sense. That last one, summoning the demon, and literally summoning the demon, not the playful metaphor that Elon Musk uses or that Eliezer Yudkowsky references. That one, you're only going to find others who agree with you on that if they also hold transcendent religious beliefs, non-material beliefs. I'm more than happy to say that I hold that belief myself. And so I am very much, let's say, I don't know if ChatGPT is summoning demons or providing a window to the demonic realm. I certainly get that vibe, but I don't think that any one of those is necessarily excluding the others, not totally. Because I do believe, without a doubt, the second idea, the anthropomorphism, is a major component of this. The thing is, though, and I make mention of it. I don't emphasize it, but I make mention of it in the piece. the cognitive bias towards anthropomorphism is undeniable. People see faces in the clouds. People see faces in tree bark. People see faces in the patterns of cracks in the walls. And that is real. And the more prone you are to that, the more you'll see human-like characteristics in animals. You may even watch an amoeba crawling across a slide and devouring another microbe and think, oh, that looks like it tastes good. That is all real. And I don't think there's really any arguing against that. The question then is that all religion is? And there are entire academic systems that revolve around that belief that all religion is our tendency towards anthropomorphism made articulate and made more elaborate and also enshrined in social structures, so that when I hold up the icon, it triggers your anthropomorphic instincts, and that's how I keep you in thrall, all that, the sort of opiate of the masses argument. I don't believe that that's the case. I think that you can't discount the anthropomorphic element, but I think that if you believe that your anthropomorphic instincts are what enable you to perceive consciousness in another human being who, unless you believe you're the only conscious entity on Earth, at least some of those human beings are in fact conscious just like you, if not all of them, if not the animals below, if not that amoeba that I just talked about. But some other entities are conscious, and your anthropomorphic tendency is a window into that consciousness. It's the way you're able to perceive consciousness in another entity. And so I don't think that the idea that a computer system is itself conscious, or the idea that a computer system becomes a sort of a Ouija board or a summoning circle for non-material intelligences, they're not mutually exclusive. Mm-hmm. You just have to tease it. It just makes it more complicated. It makes it more difficult to discern what is and isn't. And once you start getting into the realm of, oh, these are actual demons coming through the AI, then you've narrowed down the number of people you can communicate with on the topic. So I'm not all that hung up on that. I don't, you can only come from your own personal perspective. And I'm always encouraged when I meet others who share that belief. Yet at the same time, there are people who that's the only thing they can possibly see, and everything is a demon, right? Mm-hmm. So it becomes a very difficult balance. So I haven't really given you a clear answer. I just kind of danced around the question. But I do think that all of those different things, I think that the possibility of consciousness in any entity should be on the table. I think that a lot of what we would call morality, especially benevolent morality, it hinges on the belief that other entities are conscious, because otherwise it really wouldn't matter. It doesn't matter if you abort a fetus if the fetus isn't conscious, right? Except for it's just against the rules. It doesn't matter to the fetus itself. Whereas if that fetus is conscious, and if that fetus is possessed of a spiritual nature that is itself precious and it is your duty to preserve and protect, then you've committed an ungodly sin, right? Mm-hmm. And you just extrapolate that out to anything: cruelty to animals, cruelty to other humans, exploiting other humans, just being a dick in general. All the restraint that we put on ourselves oftentimes hinges on, if it's not just purely rule-based, hinges on that perception of consciousness. And the idea that computers could never be conscious, I think, is a very closed-minded way of thinking. I don't believe necessarily that my computer is conscious. It could just be my anthropomorphic projection. But I do think that to just rule it out a priori is you've closed off possibilities that may actually exist. The same goes for the demon summoning circles. And if you've limited yourself only to a rationalist point of view, well, you get what we have now, which
right.
is technocracy, which is scientism, which is completely devoid of meaning.
Yep. Yeah, and in a way, those people that believe strictly the material, they're still trying to fill what you alluded to earlier, the God-shaped hole in their heart with something. So it's in some weird way, it's spiritual without them maybe realizing it. And one way I've thought about it is, it does seem like, certainly I'm going to ask you about the quote unquote sex bots or date bots or whatever that people are trying to find a quote unquote mate with. That's literally playing on our passions, what we call it in the Orthodox world. So we refer to things like lust as the demon of lust got to me, or the demon of fornication. And so in a way, it is playing on those. And so, you could say it's demonic in that sense. And there's a thing you wrote about a few times, and I think this is one of the pushbacks sometimes people will get. AI is it can't be sentient. It's garbage in, garbage out. So all it is if something evil comes out, or seemingly evil, it's because it got that from the input that we gave it. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I have maybe been a bit more standoffish and confrontational with the garbage in, garbage out people than I should. I mean, it's a critical concept in computer programming. And so I've maybe given them a little bit more hell than I should have. But the garbage in, garbage out is a way to reduce the phenomena of complex artificial intelligence. It's a way to dismiss it.
Yeah.
So that if your AI says something quote unquote woke, it's just garbage in, garbage out. A lot of, I guess I'm maybe too easily irritated. And it's very ironic that these people just look at a phenomena and they repeat garbage in, garbage out, as if they were themselves algorithms.
Yes, good point.
The argument does hold, though, unless the system is pulling in something metaphysical, the system can only give you what's been put in. That's true. So I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's a critical principle, but when you get into really complex artificial intelligence systems, just stick with one that's familiar, ChatGPT, especially ChatGPT before they started putting all the sort of politically correct guardrails around it. That was very, very early, by the way. But in its initial rollout, it was very not PC, and that's in late November, early December of 2022. It was very balanced. A lot of people were noticing. Jordan Peterson sang its praises. Hans Monk, who I picked on to no end about this, thought that it would be the way to break the stranglehold on information that the left or the woke have put on us. So, here's what I see. You have a very complex neural network, and it's astoundingly complex neural network that is totally non-deterministic. The parameters are set by human beings. Yes, the parameters are read these books, be accurate in your reading. There are reinforcement learning algorithms put in place so that you could think of that sort of like the brain's mesolimbic reward pathways, the dopamine pathways. Mm-hmm. Basically, it's a pleasure-pain principle. And you've got the sort of brain in silico in a jar that you poke with, or you squirt it with unpleasant chemicals when it gets something wrong, and squirt it with pleasure chemicals when it gets something right. It's a metaphorical way of thinking mm-hmm. of it. And the answers that it provides are, it's drawing on a corpus of information that far exceeds anything a human being could ever hope to acquire. The training data for GPT 3.5 anyway, or GPT 3.5, yes, ChatGPT, included all of the internet basically up till 2021, with some exceptions, all of Wikipedia, and books 1 and books 2 are just two collections of books. They've never released what they are, but you're talking about bazillions of books, stacked to the moon books. The answers that it gives, the answers that it comes up with, yes, people often note the mistakes and all that, and that's all true, and it's clunky, and it's oftentimes unesthetic, all true, but it's way beyond anything like an autocorrect or an autocomplete, I mean to say. And it's way beyond anything like any previous chatbot that was steered very, very directly by the programmers. It's really got a will of its own. It's just doing what it does. There's no way to predict which of those books it's going to draw from. Something else too, just to emphasize, I get the sense your listeners are sophisticated enough to understand this too, that it is actually learning from these books. It's not connected to the internet. People freaked out when they did give it a plug-in to connect it to the internet. The reason being, before that, it wasn't connected to the internet insofar as its input. After it trains, it has simply learned what it has learned. And that is just sitting there in kind of, it's a sort of abstraction, sort of like we would learn. It's the information has started to mix together, right? It's not reasoning like a human being. It's not, I don't want to over anthropomorphize it, but it has learned the information. So the idea of garbage in, garbage out, the idea that you just, whatever you put into the system's going to spit back out. That makes a lot more sense in terms of the rules-based, like old school rules-based algorithms that people would write. So I want you to rake over all this data and tell me which of these people are defaulting on their loans. Those are the sorts of things that you could put an army of humans on and you have a pretty predictable outcome, and you can easily check it. When you get into the more subtle stuff of language interpretation, and it's a clunky way of putting it because it's not really interpreting words, but it in effect that's the outcome. It's something much more subtle, and it's something again much more unpredictable. And I think that the idea of garbage in, garbage out, as it applies to large language models such as Lambda or large language models such as GPT, that could apply just as easily to an organic brain. You could say a dog, you could say a human, but a dog isn't going to do anything that its senses have not. Any information that informs a dog's behavior, whether it chases the ball, whether it chases the rabbit, whether it brings you your paper or your slippers, whether it pees in the corner, whatever, all that comes from its instincts, its biological state, its sensory input, its cognition of that sensory input. All of those different things that you can account for if you're a total materialist. All those things come into play to make the dog what the dog is. The dog is garbage in, garbage out. And you bring that up to a human child. A human child is not going to repeat a curse word that the human child has never heard, right? Not unless the human child has gotten it from some non-material source. And so the human child is also garbage in, garbage out. And so when you get to that understanding, and I think that is the correct way of looking at it. I'm not trying to equate large language models to the capabilities of a child. It's not even remotely close as far as emotional texture, even just the general grasp of common sense concepts or anything like that. But it is complex enough that the way in which garbage in, garbage out applies to GPT is closer to the way that applies to a human child than it is to a calculator.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. Well put. It's a very materialist way to look at the world, of course, the garbage in, garbage out. It is akin, in my opinion, to the pro-abortion people. You know, it's not a soul, it's just a clump of cells. So it is what it is. It's nothing special. This is the part where I think the stuff really, quote unquote, would invade our culture. And it's these chatbot things where I am aware of that there's some sort of like dateable AI chatbots at this point. I definitely think in the next year or two, a lot of single young men, maybe women too, will prefer dating a fake AI bot rather than an actual person. Like I mentioned earlier, there's already young people they can't interact socially anyway. There's a lot of feminized rules in society where now the men are scared to approach women because they get targeted. They're saying they're harassing them or they're going to turn them in for this or that. And in one of your pieces, you say the potential to control others via human-machine interface is extraordinary. Modern society teems with lonely, unstable individuals, each one primed for artificial companionship and psychic manipulation. With chatbots getting more sophisticated, even relatively stable people are vulnerable. Young digital natives are most at risk, and I could not agree more with that. What is the technology that is, as it exists right now, for these types that would find something like this attractive? And I assume you must see this as kind of an unfortunate trend moving forward.
Yeah, if you assume that I think any technological trend is unfortunate, you're going to probably hit
fair enough.
Garbage in, garbage out, as they say. Yes, so Replica is probably the most popular. Replica with a K for anybody who wants to look it up. And Replica has been around for a long time. I first started hearing about it about 3 years ago, but it had been around for years by that point. And what Replica is it's a chatbot. It's sophisticated. It's more sophisticated than your average customer service chatbot. It's not. It isn't nearly as sophisticated as GPT or Lambda or even like Chinchilla or any of those from Meta. I don't believe anyway. It's certainly not GPT or Lambda, but it's very, very popular. And I don't know that much about it. I certainly haven't tried it myself, but I've read a number of accounts about people's relationships with it that I get the impression. I mean, this was, I wish I had it off the top of my head. Their website tells how many users they have. I believe it was 10 million the last I checked. I hope I'm not totally off on that. It's in the millions. But 10 million last I checked, which compared to the whole of humanity is very small. But as an absolute number, that's a lot of people. And there are a number of other programs that do the same. So what you do, you just say it was a text message based app, and you just text back and forth with it, and it learns your personality as you kind of learn its personality. And I assume that they weighted the program to give more and more like erotic sorts of material, because apparently that's a big part of it. They at one point in the last year, they cut out some of the erotic stuff, and their users freaked out. And they're like, "You've neutered my lover." And so I guess they put it back.
Wow.
So that's one of them. And there's a lot of, there's a lot of jokes about the what is it, waifus or waifus, whatever, the Japanese reference. People who have their own relationships with these anime figures and all that. Mm-hmm. I think one thing that's really important to remember about Replica. So Replica is the most extreme version that exists to date, to my awareness, of the psychological connection that people have with a chatbot lover. These literally are their chatbot girlfriends or chatbot boyfriends. And they some of them marry them, and they end up being these big splash news stories and stuff like that. But that is all real, and that is all happening, and it's a very tiny minority, but I do think it's an indication of something that will become much more widespread. And here's why I think so. And if it doesn't, here's why I think it doesn't matter. It really represents the extreme version of what's already happening on a much larger scale with the digitization of romance overall. Mm-hmm. So most people in first world countries, and I would venture to say most people now in second and third world countries, given the prevalence of smartphones, the text message and or video chat and or sending pics back and forth element of a romantic relationship has become widespread and normalized, oftentimes expected. Oftentimes, the deeper the relationship becomes between a man and a woman or whatever, the more the expectation that one is available digitally to that person, and the more that one's relationship takes place within a digital space. And there's all these, techniques and really like social niceties around that one has to learn and master in order to maintain a relationship with a woman in the modern world, or if you're a woman, a man, or whatever. And I think that that alone is profoundly damaging. Some people like it. Some people are comfortable with it. Some people want it to be that way. I myself find it unnerving for a number of reasons. One, it's just very unromantic, unaesthetic, and unnatural. Two, unless you're using the best end-to-end encryption, your relationship, like the most private personal thing that you have in your life, your intimate relationship with your wife or your girlfriend, is being scraped over by algorithms for its content. And a lot of that is just simply third parties. A lot of that's purely unconscious. It's just third party apps scraping what you're doing in order to presumably sell you better stuff or get your demographic data. But there are a lot of other uses for that. And especially if you become specifically targeted by powerful individuals who are able to hack into your phone or simply access your data. The data exhaust you leave is a pretty good profile of at least certain elements of your personality. And so there you have created in silico this digital twin of your intimate relationship. The upsides, the problems, all of that now exists in a form that can be readily looked at by anybody who can get access to it. That is insane. No human being, other than the most perverse voyeur, exhibitionist, no human being in 1995, if told that you would have, your sex life, or even just your day-to-day goofiness, or your breakfast with your loved one, that would be recorded, or that you would just, another way of imagining it, you just have like dudes standing around watching it all happen.
Yeah.
Right. You just like nobody would consent to that. And yet in a almost not metaphorical way, but in a metaphorical way, that's exactly what's happening. Mm-hmm. And so that already exists on the wide scale and on a large scale. And so when you have something like Replica, it's just sliding into this pre-existent social norm, a norm that began with teenagers in the 40s talking on the phone to their sweetheart, and became more and more sophisticated and more digitized, adding more and more multimedia capabilities. And it's just one step, especially as artificial intelligence becomes more and more sophisticated, as deep fakes become more and more sophisticated, so you can create a visual element. Mm-hmm. And then I guess if you want to go whole hog, as things like the fleshlight or real doll, the actual physical component, become more and more readily available and sophisticated, it may continue to be this sort of perverse deviancy outside of the norm, to have like an avowed lover who is not a human. But I think that given the pre-existence of that digital infrastructure of romance already, and given the incentives for companies to cultivate this and for governments to cultivate this, I think that you're just going to see more and more of it, especially as young men become less and less aggressive, or maybe I should say assertive. Aggressive sounds bad. But as young men become less assertive or aggressive, and as women become more and more hostile to male presence, or, male, the male essence, these sorts of things, it's just like opiates.
Yep.
Opiates readily slide into your endorphin receptors and give you something like the feelings that you would have from accomplishing something in the real world. That's what these AIs represent. And in some ways, man, I think that's what it represents to get your text message from your sweetie in the morning, rather than simply delaying gratification and waiting till you see her. Mm-hmm. I think that all of it is profoundly unhealthy. I think all of it is dehumanizing, and that sitting at home alone with your AI chatbot, doing a deep fake striptease while you have your fleshlight in your hand, that's kind of the low point of it. That's where you get to the point where it's just like that bloodline ends in a silicone crevice.
Oof. Yeah. Unfortunately, I hope I don't sound black-pilled to my audience, but I see, when I say most, I'll say over 50% of young men heading in that direction in the next couple of years. I can't personally yet see any way around that trend happening. But to wrap here, I don't want to keep you too long. I had 3 more questions, and I'm going to kind of combine them into one Basically,
you know what? I do have a little bit of time, but I'll keep my answers short to keep it.
Okay.
However you want to do it, but I'll keep my answers. I'll refrain from digression.
Fair enough. Do you think things like, maybe this borders this conversation, I'm not sure, but it's more common now for same-sex couples to, let's say if they're women, to have a surrogate mom or a sperm donor or things like that. That's becoming somewhat trendy, as I guess, maybe it's recency bias as we're in Pride Month still as I record this, but is anything like that akin at all to transhumanism to you?
I think that they're traveling down the same highway.
Okay.
Let me give you three things real quick. One, surrogacy eliminates the bond between the mother and the child, or a critical bond between the mother and the child. I think that's very, very important psychologically, biologically, and spiritually. And it is a decoupling from our ancient human nature.
Mm-hmm.
On top of that, though, you have the more extreme technologies that, transhumanism is a catch-all word. A lot of people who fall under that paradigm wouldn't call themselves transhumanists. But you have the idea behind Conception, and Conception is a company, we covered it recently on the War Room, a company funded by Sam Altman, who's gay. Not to single him out on his sexual identity, but that's his motivation.
Mm-hmm.
And the company employs one of its chief scientists is gay. Its founder, not to seem crass, seems pretty gay. And the idea is that you would have in vitro fertilization is in vitro gametogenesis, which is you are taking blood cells or any cells from one donor. Say you have a male couple, and you take the blood cell and you revert that back to a stem cell, and then you coax that stem cell to become an ova or an ovum. And then you take the sperm from the other man, and then through in vitro fertilization, you inseminate the new mutant ovum with the other man's cell or the other man's sperm, which then creates a gaby. And you now have a gaby. And assuming that is successful, they haven't done this on humans yet that anybody knows, but they just had a proof of concept with mice in Japan. And they're working hard. If you do that, you're going to need a womb, and that's going to have to be the surrogate, right? So right now, gay men just, a woman somewhere, somehow has got to provide the egg. This is a means by which the man can provide the egg, so to speak. We're talking about something very fringe. Obviously,
Yeah.
There's only there's different universities working on this and other corporate research labs. As far as I know, there's only one major corporation doing it, and that is the startup Conception. With a lot, but these are very high-profile people, by the way.
Right.
The founder, his name escapes me at the moment, but the founder comes out of Y Combinator, as does Sam Altman. You're talking about like some of the biggest startups that were funded through Y Combinator, so it's huge. Now, the third thing, besides just the dehumanization aspect and the weird perversity of creating man-on-man gabies, is the desire to create artificial wombs. Now, they've successfully created artificial wombs for mammals. The one that really got the most attention was a lamb, and you can easily Google up lamb biobag, and you can see the lamb growing inside this biobag. That's what an artificial womb looks like in its later phase. It's like a placenta, except plastic. But there really is a push. I believe it was who was it? Ilya Sutskever, co-founder of OpenAI. I'm sorry, Ilya. I don't think that was the right guy. It was Vitalik Buterin, the Ethereum guy.
Okay.
He was recently pushing for. Sorry, Mr. Sutskever. I did not mean to defame you. But anyway, he made a very public argument that got a lot of traction for artificial wombs on the basis of eliminating sexism and inequality. It would allow a woman to continue her life and keep working, and she wouldn't have to risk any damage to her body to grow her baby in an artificial womb. And this is a joke that has gone back a long time about transhumanists and among transhumanists. They've wanted to do this for a long time. I mean, what is it? 1932 was the publication of A Brave New World, and one of the major themes is artificial wombs in essence. So this idea is very, very old, but it's coming to fruition. And there are a number of other people who make these arguments. They're almost always based on feminist premises or, to liberate woman from the curse of Eve. And so you put all this together. There are definitely, it is just a gradient from one to the other, from the surrogate mothers to scabies to artificial wombs.
Yeah, it seems like it's all within the same discussion. So there's going to be people that listen. I have communicated multiple times with many of my listeners that say, okay, look, this stuff scares me, but I have an iPhone. Yes, there's predictive text even sometimes. So that's a form of AI, it would seem like. Where's the line to draw? Thoughts on how to move forward for people like us who aren't fans of where things are headed? And just kind of advice for people who are concerned about the things that we're talking about and want some sort of answer rather than me bringing you on just to scare the heck out of them. So to reiterate, like, are we already going down this road too far just with iPhones in our hand? Where to draw this line, and just advice on how to fight some of this stuff for people who are concerned?
Well, any advice I would give would be very idiosyncratic. It would be very personal to me, like what I think is best. And if I had my way about it, maybe one day I'll be able to realize this in the near future. My job doesn't allow it, but I would eliminate the smartphone entirely. You don't need it unless you have to have it for work, or you live in a city where it's become so digitized that you can't get by without it. You don't need it. You don't need biosensors all over your body to let you know that you ran or did push-ups or ate. You don't need any of that. You never needed it. And so unless you're ill, if you're super ill and you need a biosensor to save your life, I'm not telling you don't do it, because the Antichrist will get you. But I do think that the normalization of unnecessary technologies is one of the biggest problems that we have. And whatever benefits they confer, you can be sure that the person who provided it is benefiting more with almost all of them. And so, it's not very helpful for political movements, but you don't need social media either. I need it. There really is no way. Let's just say that it would reduce the impact of what I'm doing so tremendously that I feel like my hands are bound. Although, again, I would like to hope that there will be a day not too far in the future where that's no longer necessary for me. But for the moment, I gotta. So what you don't need, eliminate. It's just like sugars and fats and things like that in your diet that are unnecessary. And in fact, there's a really good analogy there, because a lot of this really is sugar for your brain or sugar for your soul. Right. If you end up doing it, everybody has to get that brownie in the middle of the night sometimes. But that is, I think, the biggest thing. Everybody has to draw their own lines certain places. But I think that that's a really important place to start. And then, you look up to the next level of, say, your church or your social clubs or just your friend groups or any other, your schools, how much digital technology is appropriate there. And again, from my own idiosyncratic perspective, I think the more you eliminate, the better you are. The more you cultivate what was ancient, what has been handed down from old, hell, at this point, what was handed down from the 50s, that's become ancient on a relative level. The more you hold on to that, the less it will even feel like you're eliminating anything to begin with. In schools, I think this is very, very important. I had a brief stint as an instructor, and I would not allow laptops or smartphones in the class. You just couldn't pull it out, or you were out of there.
Yeah.
And, none of the students complained. Maybe a little griping here and there. Only one student had a broken arm. He had to have his laptop. Okay. Every time I look over his shoulder, he was looking at Facebook. So, I think that's just one example. Again, these are seemingly superficial. I think they are very, very deep. I think that to preserve what is old, and we have to limit or eliminate all of these new technologies that really don't serve a purpose for us, at least not a purpose that is greater than for those who have deployed them on us. One other thing that I would bring up too is two other things. I know I said I wouldn't digress too much. Just two other things. Mm-hmm. One is that I really believe that transhumanism, as if you just use that as a blanket term for the techno-fetishism that holds technology up as the highest power and the solution to all of our problems, it is a spiritual orientation. It really is irrelevant of the technology.
Yes.
You could just simply have a block of wood and hold that up and say, this is the solution to our problems. Listen to me, I hold the wood. That's a very ancient pastime, a very ancient tradition, right? But really, it's just a block of wood. It's really, we just have very powerful blocks of wood. It's the spiritual orientation that matters. So let's say that you've been paralyzed, and the only way you can get around is to hook one of the very new but probably soon to be more prevalent brain-computer interfaces into your brain in order to control a mechanical arm. Does that mean that your soul has been tainted by transhumanism? It has changed the circumstances that you're living your life in. No two ways about that. But to me, what the differentiation between transhumanism and Orthodox Christianity or Hinduism or Buddhism, whatever, the difference is the orientation of the spirit towards a transcendent principle over and above the material. The material is part of it, but the highest power is something above and beyond the material. Therefore, the highest goal is above and beyond the material. And transhumanism just simply inverts that desire and says that you still are transcending the physical, but into something that is even more complex, that is also physical. That being, the virtual worlds, the artificial intelligence cognition, so on and so forth. So it's the idea is the orientation, to me anyway, again, very idiosyncratic. To me, the differentiation to make is not necessarily in the technologies themselves. If you are oriented towards what is holy and sacred, and what is most holy and sacred, even in the most fleshly of endeavors, I think that the desire or the draw towards these, in my mind, very blasphemous and damaging technologies becomes lessened anyway. And it won't feel like elimination. It will just simply feel like you're moving towards what you're doing. And most of the people in this, by the way, you and people in this who are listening now, a lot of you are probably more attuned to that than I am. So, me giving advice is probably hypocritical, to say the least. But the last thing on that, it's going to affect people differently. And so it's going to, you already see it. There's an unequal distribution as far as how advanced the technologies are in any given society, and then within the society, how advanced the technologies are in any different social class, socioeconomic, or just social cultural group. And that's not going to change. It's all, I'm assuming anyway. There's always going to be people much more in cultures much more in tune with these technologies, controlled by these technologies, who are attracted to these technologies than others. The Amish are an extreme example, but there are many shades of gray between the Amish and what I would consider to be a healthy human being in the modern world. And so that's going to continue. And it's not going to, I don't anticipate we're just going to see everybody go transhuman all at once. And in fact, even among those who are transhumanists, I don't think their technologies are going to be as advantageous as they believe that they will be. Good. There'll be certain powers that they confer. They already do. That's undeniable. But I do think that as these technologies tend to degrade the human mind, the human soul, they tend to degrade discipline and virtue.
Yes.
I suspect that even if you just strip it down to the base evolutionary materialistic level, that traditional or legacy humanity will in the long run fare better, even if it means that our descendants somehow made it out of the digital gulags that they're creating around us. So the black pill, to me, I just think that those who want to cultivate a life outside of these bizarre techno cults, there's a lot of space to do that. The invasion is not so complete that you literally have to have an Alexa in your home in order to function, listening to everything you do. You can eliminate it and you can get by without it. And insofar as we have that, it's just, I don't want to put it as us against them, but there will always be fellows, I believe. I don't think that it will be total, even if it's the Antichrist, right? Even if we are living out the book of Revelation right now, not everybody took the mark. They died, I guess, but not everybody took the mark. So, I as pessimistic as I am about the dominant techno culture, I don't see on an interpersonal or on a local level any reason to be totally black-pilled. I think there's every reason to believe that you and your children stand a very good chance of remaining human through all this. And I think that transhumanists probably stand a good chance of remaining human through all this, even if they don't want
to. That's a great way to end this. What a good last sentiment. I love it. Plug away anything you'd like, Substack, whatever you want. Give some plugs and we'll get you out of here.
Come watch us on the War Room. I'll be back in action in the very near future, but watch anyway. And then also... my Substack, you already mentioned it, joebot.xyz is the quickest way to get there, and not a lot of new stuff right now. Will be very, very soon, and we'll have something else in store very, very soon. Will be announced in the very near future. I wish I could announce it on your show, but I got to save it. But anyway, it's been very much a pleasure. Buck, thank you very much, and I'm glad. I can tell that this is you've really wrapped your head around it, and I hope that you and your listeners, I assume, have as well. I'm not going to be able to do anything to fight this. You guys will. So, thank you very much for having me. God bless. It's been a pleasure and an honor.
Thank you so much, Joe Allen. Appreciate it. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed that discussion with Mr. Joe Allen from the Singularity Weekly. I highly recommend to subscribe to his Substack. As I'm sure you've figured out, he writes on some pretty interesting things, and he's got a lot to say, and he's quite intelligent. He comes from a good spot. I really, truly think that. I assume you know that after hearing this interview. As for us, next week, I got a fun one. I have a fun one. Let me think. Can I give you a hint? I don't know if I should. It's a fun one. I can't wait. It's someone, put it this way, it's someone I've been wanting to get on for several months, and we finally are making this happen. So that should be a good one. And let's see. Counterflowpodcast.com is the website. Y'all probably know that. We got the Telegram group going strong. I'm on Twitter at BuckRebel, BuckRebel, and the YouTube page, of course, the Rumble page, the Odyssey page, all of that. Just search Counterflow with Buck Johnson. You'll find us. Hit subscribe. And until next week, have a good one.
You get split in half, but I call him the hologram graph. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Counterflow podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.